Hello. Hello.
Hello.
Kesan. This is Ram Singh.
Hello, how are you? Can you
Good.
hear me?
Yes, I can hear you clearly.
Good.
Hello, Professor Kesan. How are you doing?
Hello, how are you?
I'm good.
Good to meet both of you. Great.
Likewise.
What's the time at your place, Professor Kesan? Must be very early.
7:24 in the morning.
Oh my God. Exactly. We are like, it's 5:45 out here. So
Yep.
yeah. It's an early start to the day today.
Yep. Is the audio good?
Yeah, perfect. You sound good. You sound
Good.
And I will enable the share screen with you if you want to share your PowerPoint presentation with the audience.
Yeah, I will do that. Can you guys see this?
Yeah, perfect. We can see that.
So I will sort of start from, so I'll use the full screen. Is that okay?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Very good.
So Professor Kesan, Professor Ram is the director of this very new institute, which has come forward as a mark of 100 years of University of Delhi, and it's known as Institute of Eminence. And
wonderful.
We have few schools in that. And one of the schools which Professor Ram is heading is the School for Public Policy and Governance.
Wonderful.
And Professor Ram originally, belongs to Delhi School of Economics. He's a professor there, and he has picked up this important role of
famous school.
Very famous school. Yes, indeed.
Yeah. Okay. So just one quick question. I don't mind if people want to interrupt me during the presentation, but I don't mind, but I wonder if that's a better way to go, or to allow me to talk for about 20-30 minutes and then take questions.
So I guess it's better if you complete what you have to say, and people can note down their questions. They can also send their questions in the chat box. And once your talk is over, you have covered the main points you want to cover, then we can have Q&A session. We can have rounds of Q&A session, but perhaps we should let you present your thoughts first.
Okay, that sounds great. I think that works well in the Zoom format because of the delays and sometimes in the audio and so on. I think it works better if I present everything and then take questions. Yes,
otherwise coordination becomes kind of can go out of hands. So.
Exactly.
So, Ru, I guess you will take care of the Q&A.
Yes, Professor Ram, if you want that from me, I will handle the Q&A session.
Yes, please do.
Okay, I'll do that.
So about 25 minutes ballpark.
Roughly.
Is something.
Roughly, yeah. I will try to keep my remarks short, just so that there's more opportunity for discussion.
Sounds good.
I think we can start in about 2 to 3 minutes, Professor Ram.
Sure.
We'll wait for another 2.
You will give us a go ahead and we are ready to go.
Okay. Sounds good.
So, Professor Kesan, I read about you that you have a patent. Not only you are a patent attorney and an
Yes.
academic, but you have patents in your own name.
Yes, I'm a engineer, so actually have a PhD in electrical and computer engineering. So I have more than 20 patents.
And
these patents come from electrical engineering, computer engineering areas.
Yeah, all in radio frequency, RFID, high frequency applications, that kind of stuff.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So yeah.
Do you actually have access to a lab? Do you work with some lab as well?
Yeah, I have worked. I've worked as a research scientist at IBM for several years before becoming an academic, and I continue to work with startup companies and technology companies a lot. That's a good part of what I do is I work with, including companies in India.
That's super impressive. Unusual, very unusual also.
Yes, and I mean, I actually live what I'm talking about. Honestly, I live what I'm talking about: collaborations, between companies and faculty and so on.
Yes, your work it's a massive amount of work you have produced.
Yeah.
We actually had a kind of brief meeting in Gujarat, where you came to Gujarat Law University once. I was there in that event too.
Right.
It has been several years ago.
Oh, okay. Yeah. It's I think there's tremendous startup entrepreneurial activities in India right now. It's just it's booming.
Yes.
and very exciting.
Of startups ecosystem. Yes.
It's really booming and it's really huge. And I hope, I really hope to sort of encourage your students and faculty to take advantage of that. And that's really kind of the focus of my talk.
Professor Ram, can we start now?
Yes. Should I go or you want to?
No, I have. You are chairing the session. It's all you take the lead.
I see.
Yeah.
So, very good evening to one and all who have come to attend this event. We welcome Professor J. Kesan, who is going to be speaking on entrepreneurship, innovation, and intellectual property, the power of collaboration. Professor Kesan is a professor at the College of Law, University of Illinois. And he actually, in addition to being an academic, is a remarkable and unique blend of multiple talents. on one hand, he is practicing academics in terms of the number of courses that his teaching covers, the articles he has published in leading law journals and other at other forums. He is a practicing attorney, and he actually is, in addition, he is a practicing scientist also. So not only his research and practice our patents, intellectual property, he is someone who has patents in his own name, more than 20 patents. So it is, and all this is a manifestation of the training that he has undergone. He is a scientist by training. He is a PhD in electrical and computer engineering. And he has a JD with the super distinction, to put it in somewhat informally, but to translate for the benefit of the audience. So he has excelled in research, in academics, and actually there are numerous things one can say about our speaker today. But let me not come in your way and his way. So let me invite Professor Kesan to start his talk. Professor Kesan, you have about 25 minutes to 30 minutes for your talk. Your talk will be followed by Q&A session. So I would like to urge the participants here to take down your questions. If you would like, you can share your questions with us in the chat box. We will read the questions of chat box, but we can also consider giving you an opportunity to ask questions directly to Professor Kesan. Professor Kesan, it's an honor, it's a pleasure to have you. Floor is yours.
Okay. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much to Professor Ram Singh, Professor Rupinder Oberoi, and Delhi University and the Center for Public Policy and Governance for inviting me. I'm really pleased to share a few thoughts about the culture of entrepreneurship and the innovation ecosystem that is really taking off in a big way in India, and this sort of startup culture. And I want to spend a little bit of time talking about how the students and the faculty of Delhi University and other places can work together and really harness and take advantage of their creativities and really make a difference in the Indian economy. I hope everyone can see my slides, and I hope everyone can also hear me. So I want to talk a little bit about fundamentally innovating and reaping the rewards of your innovation from the marketplace, but innovating through collaborating. Because one of the fundamental points here is not everybody can do everything. Even as much as we may try, we all have our individual core competencies. We all have our individual strengths, and we need to work together in any sort of entrepreneurial enterprise or any kind of startup. Just a couple of examples in recent times. I mean, we all have heard of the Covaxin indigenous COVID-19 vaccine that was developed by Bharat Biotech. It was actually developed in conjunction with an institute, with the National Institute of Virology in India. And it also involved collaborations with other foreign universities and other foreign companies. Covaxin has gone through phase 3 trials and is shown to be as efficacious as 20 other global vaccines in the COVID space. It's really a tremendous success, with 78% efficacy in the latest results that I saw. So it's just an example of how people can kind of come together in various sectors, private sector, public sector, universities, institutes, and achieve something remarkable. I just happened to see in today's headlines that farmers in India were getting very creative. And it's good thinking by them. it turns out that the onions in Alibag have a distinctive sweet taste. I have not tasted it, but I'll look out for it next time I'm in India, but because I love onions. And they're supposed to have a distinctive sweet taste. So farmers are saying, hey, if consumers can recognize that these are Alibag onions, then we need to be recognized for it. And they're being creative. And they're capitalizing on it, and they're taking advantage of something called geographic indications. We're all very familiar with geographic indications in India. We all understand where the Pashmina shawls are coming from, or where some wines growing in Nashik in Maharashtra are coming from, or where Kanchipuram saris are coming from. But this is another example of how farmers are taking advantage and being creative so that they can compete with otherwise a commodity item like onions. A commodity item like onions, they're taking advantage of GI law so that they can compete better and stand out. And perhaps likely, command a higher price in the marketplace. Just an example of the kind of creativity that's possible, not just in technology, but really in all areas of social enterprise, in agribusiness, in various aspects of social innovation. So what is this ecosystem that I'm talking about? What I'm talking about is I'm talking about public institutions, universities, research institutes that involve students and faculty. And then I'm talking about the private sector. I'm talking about private companies, and I'm talking about the administration in the public sector, management in the private sector, and how government can also play a role in facilitating this collaboration, because government can make things happen by setting priorities, by incentivizing certain kinds of activities, by offering grants, by offering loans, by providing some governance, by ensuring that there is a infrastructure that is in place to facilitate this kind of collaboration. So all of these groups have their individual roles, and collectively they can really make a big difference. And that's really what is the focus of my talk. So what does this mean? This means that everybody needs to do things a little bit differently. Now, being a faculty member, faculty members love to teach, they love to research, and they love to publish papers, and they love to be experts in their own field. That's good. That's very good. But in this entrepreneurial ecosystem, in this startup culture, they need to sort of move out of the ivory tower and realize that they are really an intellectual resource for the economy at large, right? So they can be a great source of ideas, and they can guide and choose the problems to work on that the broader economy and the market cares about. And this is not just in science and technology. You could be in sociology, you could be in public policy, you could be in economics, and you could be in political science. And there are issues that you deal with, whether it's governance, whether it's new kinds of social institutions and entrepreneurship that can occur that you could be a part of. So it requires you to sort of embrace this new paradigm and look inward and decide what role and to what extent you're really comfortable doing that. But it also requires you to kind of look outside and understand what other parties want, what are their motivations, and how you can sort of fit in. Equally true for students. Students largely spend their time going to class focused on trying to make good grades. Understandable, totally understandable. You want to make good grades and you want to get a good job. Yes. But really, there are greater possibilities. And I've seen more and more of this in the last, say, two and a half decades in the US, where students can actually start thinking creatively, can develop their own startups, can work together, 3 or 4 students with different skills, people from economics and business working with somebody in advertising, or people in economic business working with somebody in biology or in engineering, and come together and collaborate. And you can have somebody do the market research, have someone else work on your intellectual property protection, and then have someone else do the product development and product management, and work together and try to excel in this kind of a real world setting where you're responding to real world problems and you're making a difference. This kind of relationship also poses new challenges for administration at universities and for management in companies, because it requires you to be someone who facilitates these interactions, because universities and institutes are full of smart people, but they need some guidance on the kind of problems to work on, or the kind of issues that are relevant in the marketplace. And universities, on the other hand, need to think about ways to make companies and the private sector to come into the university and take advantage of the student talent, take advantage of the faculty talent, and figure out how to work together and how to mutually advance both the teaching and research goals of the university with the private sector goals. The management in the private sector, of course, have to sort of get out of a mindset that, hey, I know everything about my field. I know everything about my markets, and I can invent everything that I need right here. Instead, they have to sort of think about how there might be tremendous complementary skills available in other places that might help them produce better products, better services, better features, better technologies. And in return, they, of course, have to be flexible about how they can share the rewards from the marketplace with university students and faculty. And this is where intellectual property plays such an important role. When you are involved in a startup, and when you choose to get trade secret protection, patent protection, trademarks, increase the power of your brand, you copyright your software, so on, you engage in sort of material transfer agreements where you're sort of exchanging materials across institutions, and you can use a system of licensing to ensure that you are rewarded for your innovation. And that's the beauty of intellectual property in facilitating this kind of technology transfer, or this kind of knowledge transfer, or this kind of cooperative arrangements, so that both the risks of doing research and being creative and the benefits that come out of it can be shared. And that then results in tremendous successful collaborations. You can also have financing based on IP. So, for example, a private sector company might be willing to finance some activities, some startup activities. They might also be willing to finance a startup coming out of a university with the understanding that they get access to the IP that is generated. And so the IP allows a startup to bring resources into the startup so that they can focus on product development, product management, marketing, and so on. And it allows every person in this value chain to be rewarded. So, for example, if you happen to be a person who's good at developing something, you're good at developing a brand, you're good at a new design that you have come up with that you think is going to be highly successful, and you want to protect it with, say, a trademark or a design patent, and you've come up with something, but you are not very sure about how to go about marketing it and how to take advantage of digital marketing and social media, et cetera, that's fine. You can stick commit to developing your new product and your new design, and someone else can do the branding and the marketing for you, but both of you can benefit through a system of licenses and contracts. Fundamentally, one of the big things that I want to leave you with is that intellectual property is really not about protection. It's really about control. It's about deciding who you're going to share your innovation with and under what terms. So, for example, you may have a lot of significant patent protection, but you can choose to give it away. So here is an example. There are many companies that have signed the open COVID license that basically says you can use my IP so long as you're using it for the purpose of diagnosing, preventing, containing, and treating COVID-19. So you don't need to pay any royalty. You don't need to negotiate anything. I am freely giving this to you. This is just an example of where you can control who uses your IP. You feel that it is important that we need to get a handle on the COVID pandemic. And so, hey, I'm happy to give my IP to this particular purpose. At the same time, knowing fully well that if you're going to use my IP and you're going to use the underlying mRNA technology or some other kind of vaccine technology for some other purpose or for some other illness, well, that's not permitted. For that, you may have to actually get a license. So, for example, this Open COVID Pledge is an example of where, there's so many companies in the biotech space, in the IT space, who've all come together and have signed on to simply giving away their IP for this cause. Again, it emphasizes that you can choose how your IP gets disseminated and how much control you have over it. Now, universities have had a great history in the last 30 years or so in the United States, in the US economy, where numerous services and industries and technologies and markets have all started because of work done at a university. The original page rank algorithm was developed in the university setting and was the fundamental technology that Google started with, which is the basic idea that the search results should be organized based on how many other people link to a page. So that is an indication of how useful a particular page would be. And that's sort of, hey, that's a way of ranking the pages. There are in not just in IT, but in the life sciences, there are so many examples of US universities coming up with new innovations. The same thing is true in services. The same thing is true for designs. The same thing is true for a lot of social entities and social organizations that have come about because of creative thinking through faculty and students. So it's not at all surprising that at least in the past 2 decades, we're seeing more and more involvement of the private sector with universities all over the world. And I've certainly seen plenty of evidence of this in not just US, but also in Europe and in Japan. And I'm also seeing plenty of evidence of it now, even as the Covaxin is an example of what I was using in India. And I'm seeing a lot of examples of that increasingly in the past few years in India. I want to talk a little bit about how faculty, and this equally applies to students, is that you can take different roles. You can take sort of what is sort of in this startup culture. You can decide, I want to engage only in a limited way. You can decide, hey, I just want to do my work in my lab, and I will pick interesting problems to work on, but then I will just simply turn it over to somebody else and let them run with it. I will let the postdoc who works with me, or a graduate student who works with me, or an undergraduate student who works with me, I will let them run with it. I will simply license what I've come up with. And this is my core strength, is working in my space, working in my office, working with my students. That's what I'm good at. And that's a sort of the limited engagement model, where you really are happy sticking to your basic work. Increasingly, you're seeing the opposite end, where you're seeing faculty even go to the extent of taking years-long leaves of absences and taking technology, or taking some innovation, or taking some creative ideas that they have, and taking it and being involved in the startup culture, actually embracing the risk of the startup universe by becoming a chief marketing officer, chief scientist, so on and so forth. And of course, embracing the possibility that they will succeed wildly or also fail. So that's sort of the extensive engagement model. And we're actually seeing lots of examples of that as well. And of course, there are other sort of modes where it's somewhere in between, where you might decide to take on more of a consulting role, more of an advisory role, but you're actually involved a little bit more than simply turning over the technology, where you're actually involved in developing whatever you've come up with, whatever idea you have, whatever new service you have developed, so on and so forth. I want to point out to you this data to show you, despite all this engagement between the private sector and universities, the government has a very important role, because the government can actually not only provide a lot of funding, unlike the private sector, but they can also embrace more risk, and they can actually afford to fail in a manner that a lot of private companies have a lot of difficulty with. And that is seen in the United States. The yellow bar chart here is the private sector funding. And the government funding is typically 5 to 6 times private funding over, literally 2 decades. So you can see that the government has a very important role to play when it comes to funding innovation, entrepreneurship, and creative activity. So what I really want to sort of leave you with is the idea that we can work together, and individually, each of us may perceive something like a startup to be very risky. But as a team, we can increase our chance of succeeding. You can stay with your ideas and bring other people into the mix who can help you collectively. So they have talents and expertise that you don't have, and you can respond to the set and create these set of skills and talents that you need to succeed in the marketplace. And you can use things like IP protection to make it attractive for the private sector to come in to an institute or university. You can make it attractive for the institute and university, knowing that there is good IP systems in place, allows them to freely give away their innovations to other people and reap the benefit through this process. And you can work together and develop the trust that is needed to succeed. And it, of course, helps to have 1 or 2 success stories. So when you have some successful entrepreneurial activities at Delhi University, please publicize it widely to make it seem like this is actually realistically possible. and you can actually make this happen. So I'll stop right there, and happy to take questions.
Thank you, Professor Kesan. I would invite questions. Since I don't see any questions in the chat box, if there is
Roop, let me ask a question to Professor.
Sure.
Professor Kesan, thank you for this talk. This is a highly motivating talk. I'm sure the participant here will benefit, and I'm sure you have persuaded some of us to reach out to the private sector, to other disciplines, to forge teams, partnerships, to foster innovations and entrepreneurship in Indian ecosystem. Really appreciate. So one question is motivated by a slide that you put together, that even in a system like US, where there's a critical mass of researchers with the government, in academics, and also with private sector, with corporate sector, they also hire a large number of researchers. Even there, we saw very little, by comparison, very little contribution by private sector. Does this scenario change if you focus on some specific sectors like pharmaceutical? The question is, are some sectors more amenable to private sector funding, private sector participation to boost research and development?
Right.
Is there some lead through that lens? That's the question. Thank you again.
So very good question. What the data actually, I've actually done quite a bit of empirical work on this area. I do actually a lot of data gathering and empirical work for those of you who have sort of seen some of my publications. The key thing is not so much certain technology sectors as much as the stage at which the work gets more private funding. So even in pharmaceutical work, even in life science work, at the more fundamental level, where you're focusing more on the chemistry and on sort of fundamental inorganic, organic chemistry or basic biology, sort of focused on sort of genetics and molecular cellular biology, and you're working on sort of genomes and so on, the basic research very often gets more government funding. And as interesting therapies and interesting possibilities emerge, as you're going down the funnel and the risk of the research is reduced and certain candidate therapies become clearer, then you see more private sector funding. So it's really more about, as anybody with sort of a sense of how risk works and risk and opportunity trade-offs work, sort of fundamental concepts in economics, you can see that as the risk is reduced, the possibility of and the opportunities increase. And so then the private sector sees a greater chance for something successful emerging out of it. And so what really this boils down to is that at very early stages, whether it's computer science or whether it's electrical engineering or whether it's biotech, the more fundamental work does tend to require more government funding, more work by universities and research institutes. And as you're going along, and as you are increasing the likelihood of coming up with something successful, or you're sort of, another way of saying this is you're reducing the likelihood of failure, I think there's greater opportunities for the private sector to come in.
Thank you. That makes sense. That makes actually eminent sense. Will this be, if can I ask one more question?
Definitely. Go ahead, Professor Ram.
1.5 question. One is a follow-up question. Okay. So in terms of, if one were to use terms from intellectual property law, so is it fair to say that it's at the inventive incremental stage where there are commercial benefits are imminent, At that point, one can count on private sector, but for more fundamental research, as you said, it's the government that has to do heavy lifting. So this is the half part of it. The full question is again related to the collaboration that you have pushed, nudged us into thinking and fostering collaborative partnerships. So you have a unique. You are a unique person in the sense that you have scientific training. You also have legal training. So perhaps it is easier for you to talk to lawyers, you yourself being a legal academic and also scientist. But someone not straddling the scientific fields and also legal field, what will be the challenges when one has to engage thinkers or participants from other discipline, other side of the aisle, so to speak, and how one can go about overcoming those initial hesitations, come reluctances. Thank you.
Yeah. So, the reality is that it's not so much scientific or not scientific, but it's more about whether you have a problem-solving mindset or you don't. I have seen, students of mine who have come up with new opportunities to help orphans, who have come up with new opportunities to help handicapped people. And in fact, one of them, motivated by a desire to help handicapped people because of handicapped people in his own family, just motivated by that, started focusing on more prosthetics and more sorts of technical solutions, things that he didn't know, but he was just motivated by a desire to help handicapped people. And that became the focus of a startup, and then managed to get other people who would have the expertise to come in and make a difference. The point here is that it's really more of thinking and looking at the world around you in a different way. There may be an idea for a new restaurant, you just haven't focused on it, and that actually takes a lot of creativity and a lot of design, a lot of thinking, a lot of market research, trying to understand what people want. But it actually is very creative and very careful thinking and planning. So it's not just in scientific things. On the other hand, I want to emphasize that we live in a world where increasingly we believe that there are technical solutions that are possible to anything and everything. By that, I mean, let's look at the great social problems that we have at this time. Let's say we talk about increasing the level of education amongst people. When we think of educating more people, improving the possibility of them living richer lives through better education, again, we think the solution is technology. If we think of poverty eradication and we think of making food widely available, again, we think that the answer to that lies in certain types of insect-resistant technology or drought-resistant technology. If we think of clean drinking water, we again think of various ways of doing this. So in fact, there's a lot of social problems where we think we should harness what we know in the world of science and technology and bring it and apply it to those situations. So I actually think there is a need for people to not only be scientists and technologists, but also other people to recognize where they can deploy what we already know to solve new problems and new applications. And that's where we cannot just simply rely on our engineers and scientists, and we have to think more creatively about our other majors and people who look at the world differently.
Thank you, Professor Kesan. Professor Ram, are you there? Okay, so I think that answers your question, and Professor Ram would have been satisfied with that, assuming that. There are some interesting questions now in the chat box. I'm going to pick up some of them. I think the first question is from Suman, and she's asking you, Professor Kesan, how would you compare the IP system in India and that of US?
Yeah. Very good question, Suman. What I would say is that used to be the case about, several, maybe 2 or more decades ago, where it was often thought that IP is a system that's really meant for rich, quote unquote, Western countries. What we have seen in the last 2 decades or so is that there is good innovation and good technology that is coming out of every part of the world. So that is what has caused developing countries to change their approach to IP. There's a tremendous amount of technology and software innovation coming out of India. There's a tremendous amount of pharmaceutical innovation coming out of India. There's a tremendous amount of creativity. Bollywood relies heavily on anti-piracy and copyright protections. There's a tremendous amount of creativity in every aspect. And so as a result, countries, not just India, but even countries like China, are now focused a lot more on improving IP protection. And so what you see now is you have a very good patent protection that's available in India. You have very good, and you actually had it for an even longer time, a very good system of trademarks and brands that are well known and well developed in India. So I would say what is happening is that the innovation culture is taking hold and people are becoming more creative and they're developing newer things and better products and better services, and they want to be rewarded for their creative activity. And so that's the IP system has then been going along to sort of help them. So today, there are still some differences and we can certainly talk about it. But I would say that the IP system is pretty well developed in India.
Suman, I hope that satisfies your curiosity. I think Suman was coming from a point because we still rank very low. I was reading somewhere that our scoring is just about 38.4 out of 100, and we rank around 40th or 43rd in the top countries. So that kind of ranking is probably not becoming of a nation, because we celebrate the ecosystem, Atmanirbhar Bharat. Those kind of policies are emanating from India, but we still see that in terms of ranking in the patents or in the intellectual property, we are very, very below US or say China. I think that's the concern, and if you can throw some light on that, Professor Kesan.
Right. So that's a very good point. So what you're talking about is, first of all, there is, in these studies, first of all, 40th is not really bad, because you're usually talking about 200 countries. So so it's all relative. But having said that, you're right. there is the number of filings from India relative to the size of the economy, relative to the size of the Indian economy, which is now, a top 5 economy in the world. Relative to that, yes, the culture of filing for protection, whether it's a patent or a trademark, etc., that level of engagement doesn't penetrate deeper. For instance, you will find a lot of desire to obtain IP protection from the top 20% in terms of size in the Indian economy. Companies in the top 20% are very aggressive. They're very aggressive about obtaining all these kinds of protections. But it tails off quickly. Whereas in some of the other countries, like, say, Japan or Germany or US, you find more small and medium-sized companies, use the IP system more. So what is needed is that sort of deeper penetration, not just the very large companies.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But I will personally tell you that is changing. The startups that I work with in India are very aggressive about protecting their IP. They're very aggressive. So I think it's changing. This is, you've taken a snapshot of one moment in time where you say today it's rank 40. If you look 2 years from now, it'll be rank 20. So it's really changing.
We have with us Professor Anita Kamra. She's also in a different school of Institute of Eminence. She is associated with the School of Public Health. And I think that issue of patency and intellectual property rights is very significant for Professor Anita. I think she would like to come in and share her ideas with you.
I was dying to come in and not interfere, but definitely I wanted to put a point across that it sounds very interesting. It is very good. The times are changing, but there is a reason why we cannot patent. We are really starving for funds. We have innovations, we have scientific data, and although it was very promising that COVID-19, we could get the vaccine against SARS, but that was because of a whole lot of data which was generated for MERS. So one forgets that. So how can we help the students generate funds? See, our idea is, yes, I also could have patented 20 more patents, but we have a whole lot of research with us, but we do not have the facility. We do not have facilitators also. I may lack the facility, but nobody will come forward to facilitate either. Right. So there is the lacuna which has to be covered.
I completely agree with you. I 100% agree with you. And this is, believe it or not, you will hear the same problem from life science departments and from engineering departments at US universities. So what is the successful ones? This is what they do. The successful ones recognize that they have to have a tech transfer department that has to be run as a cost center. It has to be run as you have to provide funds. And the government has to provide funds, yes. And so in other words, that cannot be a situation where you say, hey, I gave you money for 5 patents. How much money have you made from it? Well,
it doesn't look like.
Yes, because this is basic work. It's going to take time, and it may or may not be successful. You can only increase the size of the denominator. You can only increase the amount of IP, and over time, a few of them will develop. And that mindset requires government participation, requires government funding. And I'll tell you, places like CSIR in India are very, very aggressive. They're very, very aggressive in patenting.
Translation, it takes time. You can have patents, you can have innovations, but the translation cannot happen overnight.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It cannot. And particularly, this is an issue with the life science. So in software and IT, it's a little bit quicker.
It's health sector cannot be taken easy because we are going to, after all, give it to the mankind. We can't take chances. The ethical issues, the regulatory issues are very stringent.
Yeah, but again, that's the beauty about the IP system, is that you can get all your patent protection, give it away for free. But when somebody makes money out of it, you want money. So that's the beauty. So for example, the Cohen-Boyer gene splicing technology, which was developed by Berkeley and Stanford, Berkeley and Stanford says, if you are a research institute or you're a nonprofit organization, take it free, use it, please. But if you're going to make money, then you need to give me a nickel. You need to give me a penny. You go make your dollar, but you give me a nickel or a penny because you're making money. Right? So if you're going to make money, then you should pay me because I've done the good work. But if you're going to do it as a nonprofit, go ahead, enjoy, take it for free. So that's the advantage of the IP system, is that you control things. You don't have to. You can help mankind. You can help farmers. You can help nonprofits. You can help just like the Open COVID pledge. But
then why patent? Then why patent? If you have to give it away for free, then why even invest in IP? That is the question the students are very confused about.
Right.
That clarity clarity they want by these kind of webinars and discussions. So, children question, and we are very happy to hear their questions. They've come up with very nice questions.
Right.
And thank you for taking so much time.
No, absolutely. And here is the advantage. To just finish my thought, why patent? Berkeley and Stanford, just to take the Cohen-Boyer example, the gene splicing technology has got these universities about 150 million. Because private companies have benefited, and so now the research in these universities can develop. Yeah. So of course, those who want to do basic research, go ahead. Don't pay me. We don't want it. But if you're going to make money, then how am I going to keep the supply of good innovations coming in the universities? This will allow me to keep the supply going, because it only takes one or two good solutions to do a lot of basic work. So it's not really either or, it's both.
Yes, true. Thank you so much.
I think that makes sense. Yeah.
Thank you, Rupinder. And thank you.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, thank you, Anita, and thank you, Professor Kesan. I see a very interesting question in the chat box, which is from Dhruv Kapoor. And he says, "Sir, do you think that the young entrepreneurs in India are more inclined towards certain popular sectors like edutech, fintech, etc., and there's somewhere a lack of entrepreneurship in industries like agriculture, forestry, and fishery? How can we tackle this issue if you believe that exists, if you believe that there is an issue like this in the sector?"
So, excellent question. Dhruv, you are pointing to something which is one of the fundamental ingredients to succeeding as an entrepreneur. I'll tell you one more, but what you're saying is that don't follow the herd mentality. See where opportunities exist and go for it. In fact, that is absolutely true. In fact, there's a lot of examples I can give you of people who went into unexplored, underdeveloped areas. And actually, it's very much like the Warren Buffett line of thinking in investing. He says, when everybody's buying something, don't buy Go to those areas where, it's the opposite of the herd mentality. Because when everybody's doing something, it's probably overpriced. Go find opportunities where things are undervalued, where they are undervalued opportunities, undervalued, as Warren Buffett would say, stock. So yes, I completely agree with you, Dhruv. The second point I want to make is try to pick those undervalued areas where you have expertise. So that is the second piece. I've often found entrepreneurs succeed in areas that they have experience in, where they have worked or where they have studied, and they understand the problems in that area. So if you're interested in going into forestry, or you're interested in going into fishing or agriculture, any of those, either you should have some expertise in that area so that you understand the problems in that area, or you team up with somebody who does. So I have often found that entrepreneurs succeed when they work in areas they know a lot about. They know what the problems are, and they know what problems need to be solved. And that, instead of you inventing something and then looking for a problem that your invention is going to solve, the most successful entrepreneurs are very often those who understand a problem and then figure out a solution to the problem. You don't want to have a solution looking for a problem to solve. Rather, you really want to focus on a problem in an area that you're good at, that you really know well, and then work on it. And that increases your chances of success. And picking areas where it's not quote unquote popular. And I love the quotes in popular that you put in your question, because I totally understand what you're saying. That's exactly what you want to avoid. And work on the unpopular things, and you might actually succeed.
There's another question by Selena Shrivastava, and she's coming from, as you know, Professor Kesan, we have a Center for Innovation and Social Enterprise in Kirodimal College, which was part of the project that I led. And we have this young students associated with the center. And this girl, Selena, she's asking you, probably she ran through your LinkedIn profile, and she says that I saw on your LinkedIn profile that you served as an IP advisor. As a CISE in the research-based center, what should we keep in mind which is more likely to be neglected while launching any social enterprise or an enterprise per se? So she's coming from the school of social enterprise, and she wants to understand your take on it. That what should be your advice as an IP expert to them?
I think pick your problems you want to work on carefully. That's really very important. It doesn't matter whether it's a social enterprise or any enterprise. You want to think carefully about the problem you want to work on, and try to pick, if you're going to work hard on any problem, please pick a major problem. Please pick a big problem. You're going to work hard anyway. You're going to put in a lot of your time and effort. So pick some really difficult problems that you think are going to be hard to solve. That's okay. It's okay. And put a group together of people who can work together or who like to work together. A group of your friends who have interesting, different qualities, different habits, different training, and put a team together and work on what you see as pressing problems. Believe it or not, we all are very good at drinking our own Kool-Aid. We all think that all our stuff is great and wonderful. That's why we need other people to tell us it's not so great and it's not so wonderful. So that's why you really need to work with other people. You need to build teams, pick big problems, and together, you can challenge each other. You can, put the ideas that one person develops by kicking the tires, looking under the hood, and really testing these things so that you come up and you advance the solutions and you think through what are the disadvantages and what are the additional problems. You may be even creating more problems with your solutions, but you need somebody else to tell you that. And so that's why I've found that the most successful people are those who work well together, form teams, and just go to try and solve big problems.
Absolutely. I think that's the whole idea of collaboration, and also having a critical thinking or a critical friend as a part of the team also, who looks into those holes and lacunas or loopholes in your idea. So you need a good team, but also you need a critical friend who can constantly guard you against your ideas or grand vision, as you can say that. There's another question, the questions are just pouring in, Professor Kesan. You've ignited many minds suddenly, and keeping in mind, I'm just going to pick few of them, because I think one of the questions which is very interesting, and this is by Vardhan, and he's part of 180DC. And Professor Kesan, 180DC is a direct consultancy and the largest consultancy of student social entrepreneurs. And we have a branch of that in our college. And I'm heading that also, incidentally. And Vardhan is one of the students there. And he asked this question: do you think that it is important to ensure that the entrepreneurial culture spreads through the rural part of India, considering that it forms nearly 60% of India, and that it has massive untapped potential to solve real life problems that go often unattended?
I couldn't agree with you more, Vardhan. Actually, this is something you see all over the world. This is not just an Indian issue. If you grow up on a farm in Iowa, in the United States, or you grow up in a small town in Texas, what happens is you're smart, you make good grades in your 12th standard exams, and you'll go to a world-famous university and you will get a degree. And then what happens is what happens in India. Same thing happens in the US. You forget about your farm in Iowa, you forget about your small town in Texas where you grew up, and you're now sitting in New York, or you're sitting in Chicago, or you're sitting in San Francisco, and you've got your nice job, etc., and you're doing well. You're actually missing out on using your talent and your ability and your expertise. You might actually have gone and you may have got 2 degrees in finance. Go back and use your finance expertise to try to look at the problem of farms in Iowa, or go look at the problems of small towns in Texas where you came from, or go look at the 60% of rural India that you're talking about. And so I encourage people in little towns, yes, go to DU, go get your degrees, go become very smart, but then you actually might make a much bigger difference if you were to go back to some of the places where you came from, and you will make a huge difference. And in fact, you're also likely to be hugely successful. So I completely agree with what you're saying.
I'll just pick up the last question now, Professor Kesan, because we are way past the time. This question is from Prakash, and he says that traditional communities in India, which have ample knowledge and wisdom about the plants and forest products, have faced historical exploitation by the farmer and other industrial sector. Many of these communities are not aware of the intellectual property rights, GI tags, or patents. And they are still facing the exploitation. What is your suggestion or advice to them?
Yeah, I agree that they did face exploitation. I completely agree with you, but it's changing. I don't know if you're aware, but for example, entities like CSIR and even the private sector in India have challenged certain patents obtained in the West based on traditional knowledge and based on traditional practices related to neem, related to turmeric, etc. And they've succeeded in invalidating many of these patents that were issued at an earlier time. So it's actually, this is changing. In fact, what you're finding is that now a lot of these communities are recognizing that they have a lot of knowledge, they have a lot of expertise, and they can use it to make sure that IP rights are granted for real innovation, where IP rights are granted commensurate with what you've really developed, and not going and taking things from other places where it's widely known. And so the IP system itself recognizes that's not real innovation. You're just simply taking things from other people, and then you're trying to use the IP system. And so that's why these patents have been invalidated, including in the US Patent and Trademark Office. These neem patents and some of these turmeric patents have all been invalidated. So yes, things are very much changing, and as they should. You cannot have a system where you have IP protection for things that are all well known. It has to be based on new innovation. Now, having said that, you can take something that is known and that is widely known, that this root or this stem or this plant has some therapeutic properties, and you can do some research and analyze what substance and what chemical compound in those plants, etc., are responsible for those properties. And then you go to the lab and then you figure out a way to artificially manufacture it so that now that is available to the whole world. It's not just available where the plant is growing. It's not just available where the root is. Now you have come up with a artificial way to make it in the lab. That's fine. That's fine. But then what is happening in these biodiversity protocols is that they're now talking about how to reward those groups and those communities where that initial knowledge came from. So in other words, if you want to go do that and create it artificially, that's fine, but you owe some payment to the indigenous communities. And that's what a lot of the biodiversity councils are working on. And so, yes, so this is just designed to prevent the kind of exploitation that you're talking about.
Thank you, Professor Kesan. I think this will be the last question because we have overshot the time also in that sense. So I'm really, really grateful. It was a privilege and pleasure to have you with us this evening. And what you talked was very, very insightful, because the three pillars of research, faculty, and the students, and how you negotiate with the market in terms of IP laws, and also breaking the silos of the subjects, because you harped upon, you underscored the importance of collaboration into disciplinary research. I think that's the need of the time. And so very, very insightful talk to, I'm sure the students and the faculty who attended it today really benefited. And we are a young school, the School of Public Policy and Governance. I would love to have you more in our programs, guide us through some of the research works which we're trying to establish, and have us mentor in the zone which you have an expertise in. Thank you, Professor Kesan, for being with us.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and really a very interesting discussion and great set of questions. I really enjoyed not only the kind of questions, but really the quality of the questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Kesan. But we need you more in the center, both at the Center for Innovation and also the Delhi School of Public Policy and Governance. I'm going to disturb you more from here on.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Kesan. And thank you, everybody who joined us today evening. Thank you, students. Thank you, Professor Ram. Thank you, Prakash. Thank you, Anita ma'am, and all others who are with us. I hope you enjoyed the session. Thank you, and good evening. Have a good day, Professor Kesan. Have a good day.
Thank you, Professor Singh. Thank you, Professor Oberoi. Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.